Welcome back, glad you could join me. Now if you own the Nikon Z6II and you are a wildlife photographer, should you shoot in RAW or should you shoot in JPEG? And which mode should you use, continuous high or continuous high extended? And what about the frame rate between RAW and JPEG? Well, this video is all about that. So do you see that? The difference between RAW and JPEG? Yes, the RAW file looks a little bit darker, but look at the JPEG already. Now there is a big difference in the scene that you just seen between the JPEG and the RAW. You have to understand a JPEG is really a finished product. But did you notice the frame rate? How quick we were shooting in JPEG. And this is something that a lot of people don't realize, and something that I hadn't realized until only about 3 weeks ago when I went out and I was starting to research this video and go like, what is the difference? Let's just try and have some fun and just shoot in JPEG to get more action. And I just couldn't believe how quick the camera was shooting. Now, here is an example. I am in continuous high, shooting in RAW now. That's 20 frames. Now, let's quickly go over and we'll shoot in JPEG fine. Nearly double. Now if I'm shooting at RAW, it takes me 2 seconds to take 20 photos. But if I'm shooting in JPEG fine, it only takes me 1.2 seconds to get to 20 images. Nearly double. Can you get away with shooting JPEG, or should you just stay in RAW? Now I know quite a lot of hobbyist photographers that say like, well, I don't want to subscribe to Lightroom. I'm really just a hobbyist. I just want to go out. I just want to take some photos with my Nikon Z6II and just have some fun and not worry about doing too much of the editing stuff when I get home. Got a busy life. I just want to go out, take some photos, come home, maybe crop or brighten them up a little bit, and that's it. Well, this video is for you, and it's also for those who think that RAW is best. Now, I'm saying a weekend or a hobbyist photographer. For me, I'm very serious when it comes to wildlife. So I shoot in RAW 90% of the time. The times when I'm shooting in RAW and JPEG is when I'm doing content for YouTube. But after going out a couple of times, testing out different lights and all that, I'm thinking like, well, what about when the light is very bright, I've got even light, and the action is going to be fast and furious? What about if I just shoot in JPEG? I'm not going to be printing these photos. I'm just sharing them on social media. Can I get away with it? And I found that on good light, yes, I can certainly get away with just shooting in JPEG. And like I just said, I can get a lot more photos in that same amount of time. So I can get very quick action. If a bird is taking off or a kingfisher is coming into the nest, I will get a lot more frames per second if I'm using JPEG compared to RAW. Now, there is a downside because really the JPEG is a finished product. This is where you really want to set up your camera to shoot JPEGs if you're shooting JPEGs. And the way to do that is using picture controls. Now, the pictures that you're going to see are taken with the picture profile called POP. I tried quite a few different ones. Normally, for me, I'm just using neutral, because I shoot RAW, so I can really process the image how I like it. But being a JPEG, I found neutral very flat. I tried vivid, a little bit too much contrast. I set up pop to give me a little bit more sharpness, a little bit more saturation, a little bit more contrast, and the photos come out beautifully. Also pay attention to exposure compensation. If it's a bright day and you're shooting white birds like corellas or egrets, then keep an eye on exposure compensation because you'll blow out the whites very easily. So an easy way if you're shooting whites on a bright day on the Nikon Z6II, have it at least 0.03 or 0.07 to the negative. That way you're going to be pretty sure that you're not going to blow out the highlights, and also use center weighted. All this is shot at continuous high extended. I know some people don't like using continuous high extended, but I found between 4.5 frames per second and nearly 9 frames per second or 8.5 frames per second, I'd rather shoot at the Continuous-High Extended. Yes, sometimes I can get problems. I can get a bit of rolling shutter, but you only see that if you're watching a whole set of photos. If you're just looking at one or two images, you're not going to see the rolling shutter. So I prefer to shoot in Continuous-High Extended. Now, let me show you some samples between shooting in RAW and shooting in JPEG. And this is at half speed, so you can really see the difference. Now the last set, do you notice 36 photos? And that was the same amount of time it took to shoot 20 RAW. I got 36 JPEG photos, nearly double. And this is an Australasian grebe, just looking around, and he's going dive. And this is in JPEG. This is RAW now. Look how slow it is. So the next set is a Pacific black duck bathing. The first set are JPEGs at half speed, JPEGs at the speed from the camera, then RAW at half speed, and RAW at the speed that it's shot on the camera. Now, I thought, like, great, Continuous-High Extended, it's giving me more frames if I'm shooting JPEG. What about if I just try Continuous-High? Because Continuous-High normally only gives you 4.5 frames a second if you're shooting in RAW. So I did the trial. The first set is JPEGs, the second set is RAW. Do you notice anything different? Nada, not a thing. That is because if you're shooting in Continuous-High, there is no difference between RAW and JPEG. So your blackout time is exactly the same. It surprised me because I really thought that if I shot in JPEG fine, I was going to get more frames per second and also less blackout, because this is a problem. If we're shooting at continuous low or continuous high, we get blackout. It's just like, we get that. Whereas Continuous-High Extended, we don't get it, but we can have a bit of rolling shutter. And also sometimes the camera mightn't focus as quickly or mightn't come back to focus as quickly. But I'm willing to outweigh the pros with the cons. This last set of photos is JPEGs taken at Continuous High, then Continuous-High Extended in real time, and then the next set is RAW taken at Continuous High and then Continuous-High Extended at real speed. So you can see there is a big difference. Maybe you never thought about using a Nikon Z6II for wildlife in JPEG because you've always been told that RAW is the best. Well, it is, but let's move away from wildlife just for a second and think about sports photographers. Do they shoot in RAW? No. Why? Because they want the JPEG so they can fire them off to their publishers, to the newsroom very quickly. They set up their cameras correctly. And in wildlife, you can do the same thing. It just takes a little bit of time in your picture controls to set up. And you can set up a couple of different profiles to suit different conditions. I've shown you like in real time, and these are just unedited. Now I want to show you the difference between RAW file unedited, JPEG unedited, straight out of the camera. Then I will show you the differences when I edit the RAW files in Adobe Lightroom, and the JPEGs, I'm not editing them in Adobe Lightroom because I feel that if you're a hobbyist photographer, you might want to pay close to $15 a month for the Lightroom subscription. And if I was a hobbyist photographer, I certainly wouldn't be paying that $15 if I was just shooting in JPEG. I would just be using the software that Nikon gives us for free, which is NX Studio. This is some great editing software, whether you're shooting in RAW or in JPEG. And I'll put a link up here to a video that I've done just to show you how to edit your wildlife photos in Nikon NX Studio. Let's run through the images. First, the RAW and the JPEGs unedited, and then the RAW and the JPEGs edited. The RAW in Adobe Lightroom and the JPEGs in NX Studio. Now the photos are starting from being outside in the bright sun to shade to some backlit images to show you really the differences between just being out in the sun, photographing a bird in the shade, and in photographing a bird that is backlit. Backlit means that the sun is behind the bird, which is very difficult to edit. You can see the RAW files are a little bit duller compared to the JPEGs. You can see even the JPEG backlit still looks fairly good. Now here's the same set of photos. The RAWs are edited in Lightroom, the JPEGs in NX Studio. So you can see there's not that much difference, is there? The biggest difference is if you're shooting in the shade and there's not much light around, or you're shooting a bird that is backlit. But really, to be honest and to be fair, how many times do we shoot birds that are backlit? That is the hardest time to photograph a bird, when it is backlit. And I try to avoid that as much as possible. But I do know that if I'm shooting a bird that is backlit, then I won't be using center weighted for my metering. I'll be using spot to try to get the bird as correctly exposed as possible. But my background will be overexposed, and I'm going to have to cope with that. Did you see how much difference there was? The first ones, did you see how good the JPEGs were straight off the camera? Now remember, I was using the POP picture control profile, and I'd modified a little bit. And these are the adjustments that I'd done in the POP picture control setting. This is all the adjustments I've done. So if you want to set up your Nikon Z6II using the POP picture control profile, copy those settings and you're going to get very similar photos than what I took. So what do you think? Do you think that this video has given you second thoughts about using JPEGs instead of RAW? I'd like to hear your thoughts. Leave it in the comments section. This video has been of help to you. Give it a big thumbs up. Stay safe, enjoy your wildlife photography, and I'll see you next time.